Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, and it is time for another mailbag where I answer your hot takes, your observations, your questions, and ultimately your comments about tennis or anything else. Over 24 hours ago, I posted on the YouTube community tab, which can be found on the homepage of my channel, and I got well over 150 comments. I was expecting a mass participation in this week's mailbag given. It's been a minute. It's been a minute since we have caught up and done a mailbag. It was before the U.S. Open started, so it's been 2 weeks. Obviously, New York has come and gone, and a lot happened in the first week where I couldn't really cover it on this channel. So looking forward to getting into a lot of those things, and as always, I can't wait. I pulled 35 questions. I will not get to all of them, but I will go for over an hour here. First one is from Sandra. What's your take on the Simona Halep suspension? I got a couple of comments yesterday on this. It was yesterday morning's news, so it's kind of recent and it's important, very important, so I want to make sure to talk about it. First of all, this does not look good for Simona. Of all of the instances I've seen of tennis players getting in trouble with the ITIA, which manages doping testing and procedure on both tours, I have never seen an instance in which a player that has the profile of Simona Halep is not only deemed culpable for the positive test, but the reason that the hammer has really been brought down and Halep has been served a 4-year suspension, which will be appealed. There's another appeal process which Halep is going to take part in. But the reason it's that severe is because the ITIA has used the word intentional in describing and convicting Halep's misgivings. Intentional was a word they used. Even in the case of Sharapova, where they said, look, you are responsible for getting to either apply for an exemption for the drug that you took. You are responsible for not knowing that it was added to the banned list. Like, all of these things are 100% your fault, but we acknowledge that you were not aware that you were cheating, or you have plausible deniability in terms of the intentionality of what you did. And with Halep, it's gone a step further where they're like, nope, basically the accusation here from the ITIA as a result of their investigation is not only did you cheat, but you cheated intentionally. And there are 2 offenses that are working against Halep that they are treating as separate offenses, which part of me is still a little bit unclear as to why that would be. I mean, considering, wouldn't it almost be double jeopardy if both offenses were in the same time period, which is 2022? But I'm referring to a urine sample where Halep was positive for roxadustat. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but basically it increases the amount of red blood cells in your blood. So it's a form of blood doping. It helps your cardio. And then in addition, there were blood samples, right? So the first one is urine samples. The second one is blood samples. 51 blood samples provided by the player as part of the ABP program, which is the Athlete Body Profile, I believe is what ABP stands for. And those also came back with irregularities. Now, the difference, as Halep continues to maintain her innocence, claiming that she took a tainted supplement, where the clash of ideas comes is that let me first say what Simona is saying. Simona is saying it's a tainted supplement. The ITIA has said the amount found, I'm going to actually read it word for word. Quote, determined the volume the player ingested could not have resulted in the concentration of roxadustat found in the positive sample. The ABP charge was also upheld, with the tribunal stating that they had no reason to doubt the unanimous, quote, strong opinion reached by the 3 independent athlete experts, blah, blah, blah. Halep is claiming that the experts found out about her identity and then changed their decisions after finding out who she was, which is quite the claim. Quite the claim. Anyway, that's the facts of the case. But I think the main discussion right now is about a 4-year ban. It's a long time. That's a really big deal. It could end her career. A lot of players who are less gifted than Simona Halep, you guys know this, 4 years might be an entire career that you're able to spend in the top 100. If you're as gifted as Simona Halep, that's usually not the case. You can generally have a much longer career. But for a lot of players, 4 years is about the length of a career. And here they are, that's the maximum suspension for a first-time offender, mind you. So let's talk about that aspect of this. I tweeted yesterday in the interest of, first of all, just seeing what people would say, how people would reply. I was curious, but also I feel like people should have this in perspective, especially considering how many tennis fans are not fans of other sports. The maximum suspension for first-time doping violation offenders. I'm going sport by sport, okay? First, you have the 4 major American sports, and I want to go through those real quick. NFL, 4 games, 25% of the season. MLB, 80 games, that's half a season. NBA, 25 games, that's 30% of the season. NHL, 20 games, 25% of the season. UFC, which is an individual sport like tennis. Well, UFC is not the sport, MMA is the sport, but it's a organization like the ATP and the WTA where the athletes are independent contractors. There is no union, but also in MMA, the severity of somebody taking performance-enhancing drugs is very, very severe. Because if I fight someone who's enhanced, they are potentially giving me more long-term brain damage than if they were clean, right? So I'm clean, you're enhanced, and you're giving me brain damage. I mean, it is an incredibly immoral thing it's immoral in all sports, don't get me wrong, but it's much more immoral in MMA and boxing. UFC max ban is 2 years for a first-time offender. That's the max. I tried to broaden my search. I tried to figure out what Gauff is. Golfers, I couldn't find it. And I don't think performance-enhancing drugs are, maybe certain performance enhancers, but I'm not sure that there's, they either don't test very much for it or the players stay clean because they figure there's not all that much of an advantage. I don't know, but I couldn't find it. Because I did want to kind of expand out of the United States, and I did look at English Premier League football, and all I found was that nobody in the history of the league, from what I found, has been banned longer than 9 months, which was Mark Bosnich, 9 months. I see some other failed drug tests. Adrian Mutu, Chelsea, 7 months. Colo Torre, Man City, 6 months. So it appears that even in football, and I know Paul Pogba apparently has a case that is pending. In football, it tends to be a little bit shorter as well. Now, some people countered with the Olympic sports. What about running? What about cycling? Which, it turned out the whole sport was dirty, cycling, so they had to really crack down. Stuff like weightlifting, stuff like swimming, all of that. Now, many of those Olympic sports, Olympic-oriented sports, it is 4 years. It is 4 years. Now, I do not have this confirmed, but I think that we can use a little bit of common sense here and discern that the reason it's 4 years is because that is one Olympic cycle. And that would make sense, right? If I am a skier, if I am a cross, what's it called when it's long distance? Like the long distance skiing, cross country skiing. It's like crazy. It's like, looks like the hardest sport in the world. They're like skiing uphill. It's crazy. If I do that and I am blood doping, it would make sense, considering like the whole sport is oriented towards the Olympic cycle, which is a 4-year cycle. It would make sense that the penalty would be one Olympic cycle. To me, that makes sense. Now, some people said tennis is Olympic sport. Yeah, sure. So is hockey. So is basketball. It doesn't mean the NHL and the NBA suspend players for 4 years out of their league for doping violations. Now, the question is, who's right? Is tennis right? Are the other sports right? Is it somewhere in the middle? I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. But in terms of gauging the reaction on social media, I saw both. I saw so much of both. I saw so many people say that's ridiculous. You know, the fact that tennis is so disproportionately more punitive than the other sports that I talked about. It's messed up. It doesn't make any sense. I saw a lot of other people reacting and saying, good, tennis is right. They're all wrong. They're all soft. Liam Brody quote tweeted my tweet actually and said he believes players should be banned for life for testing positive for performance enhancing drugs. So that's the debate. There is a couple of things, and I know I'm going super long on this, but it's a huge topic. It really is. A couple of things. First of all, my biggest issue with it is, with the whole thing, is how is this determined? Okay? Now, I know that there might be some international code that the ATP and the WTA, like maybe the WADA code that the ATP and the WTA is following and signed off on, but at the end of the day, they take agency over how they want to manage doping in their own on their own tours, right? They get to have that. Ultimately, the buck stops with them. And my issue is that I believe that keeping the sport clean is for the players. We talk about cheating and cheaters. Who are they cheating, right? If someone cheats in sport, who exactly are they cheating? They are cheating their fellow competitors. So as emotional or as strongly as you might feel about this as a fan, I look at it and I say, okay, it's the players who are the victims here. The players want a clean sport, and the players are the ones that are victimized if someone who they're competing against is not clean. So shouldn't it be the players who really get to sit down at a table and negotiate and determine what kind of doping policies are in the best interest of them? They should be the ones in power. And my hesitation here, where I have an eyebrow raised and I might be a little bit critical of tennis, is this. The NBA, the NHL, the MLB, the NFL, their players are organized. They collectively bargain. They have unions. They have associations. And they have certain negotiating power. The NBA players recently took issue with marijuana being on the banned substance list. And they said, look, if I play for the Denver Nuggets and marijuana is legal in my state, why is it that the NBA makes it so that I can't smoke weed? The players didn't like that. Guess what? They sat down when the agreement between the league and the players expired. They sat down at the negotiating table and they negotiated for the right to take marijuana off the banned substances list. That's just an example of the power that the players have. What does it tell you that in all of these leagues where the players actually have bargaining power, that the penalties are so far reduced? I don't know. Does it tell you that, in fact, no athletes really want a penalty of 4 years? No athletes really want that, even the clean ones, because they understand how consequential that is. And dare I say, there is some healthy skepticism about the reliability of drug testing. You know, it's the same argument when it comes to the death penalty, right? Those who do not believe in the death penalty, one of the arguments you will make is, yeah, if the judicial system were perfect, then maybe the death penalty would make sense. But if we are going to acknowledge that the judicial system is sometimes going to convict the innocent, that is where the death penalty becomes unjust. And when it comes to a suspension of 4 years, which could end Simona Halep's career, which could ruin the career of many players. We look at Michael Emer, who just kind of retired. I don't believe that he's actually retired. I think he'll come back. But we saw the impact and the damage that it could have on someone like him. You do have to question, is this system reliable enough and solid enough where we are going to have punishments as stiff as the one that Simona Halep is now staring at? That is one of the questions among many that need to be answered. But me, what's my opinion? Rubs me the wrong way that the players don't have power. That's it. That's all I'll say. All right, I'm not in support. I'm not against. Rubs me the wrong way that the players are powerless here. That they have no say over how often they're being tested, how they're being tested, what the punishments are for positive tests, all of that. Rubs me the wrong way. All right, next one from Angelos. Hey, Gill, bit of a fun one. Can you rank the top 10 ATP players from the 2010s decade and also the top 10 players from the 2020s decade so far? This was the top liked comment. It got 41 likes. I'm not going to do the 2020s. Decade just started. Come on now. But I will do the 2010s. I did do a quick Google search. I was curious if anybody has done this. Normally after a decade ends, people have fun with the content and they're kind of doing this stuff. I did see one Tennis Warehouse forum where somebody did this. By the way, I Googled my name like 3 weeks ago or something, and I saw myself in some Tennis Warehouse forums, and I saw a comment that was like, Gill Gross runs like 4 accounts in this, and it's illegal, and he should not be allowed to post his videos. The things you read about yourself on the internet, I own 0 Tennis Warehouse forum accounts. I spend 0 time on Tennis Warehouse forums, but sometimes they come up in a Google search like this. Anyway, so 2010 through 2019, the way I want to do this is I don't want to do it by accomplishments. That's boring. That's so boring. Otherwise, it would just be like a spreadsheet, right? Like who ended top 10 the most, who won the most titles, who had the most major semis, major finals. That would be a research project. I'm not here to do a research project. Let me just go off of peak level and how formidable I would consider them as a tennis player, peak level, okay? Number 1, Djokovic. Number 2, Nadal. Number 3, Federer. Number 4, Murray. Yeah, pretty easy there. Number 5, Stan, especially when you're looking at peak level. I think that one's pretty much a slam dunk as well. Now you have a tough one. You have a tough one between, when it comes to peak level, I think. But I go Del Potro at 6. And part of this is me thinking about 2009 and 2010 before the injury. Part of this is me thinking about, how impressive it was what he did in 2018. But he even did that. Like, the guy, I don't know if I say this enough, the guy got to 3 in the world without a left wrist. He was slicing all of his backhands. He couldn't get any topspin on his backhand because his left wrist was shot, and he got to 3 in the world. Come on now. So peak level, like who to me was the most special tennis player or the 6th most special tennis player of the decade? Del Potro. 7, man, it's between 2 guys, and I guess the results kind of pull me in the opposite direction of maybe what my heart says. So I'm going to give it to Cilic at 7, and then I'll make Ferrer 8. Even though I don't know, part of me feels like if it was a match for my life and I get peak Ferrer versus peak Cilic, meaning prime Cilic. I'm not talking about like redlining Cilic, because redlining Cilic would beat Ferrer just because of how big those weapons are. But if I'm getting both of them in their prime and it's like, for the life of me, who would I take to win a tennis match? I got to say my pick is Ferrer, but you know what? Respect, Marin Cilic, major champion, 2 additional major finals. Sure, it's Cilic. Number 8, Ferrer. Number 9, I think Thiem. And let me make the argument for Thiem over some other guys. Of the other guys who are in the running here, I don't think anybody has an argument that they were the best tennis player in the world for a year. And Thiem in 2020, he was pretty awesome in 2019, but Thiem in 2020 was right there with Djokovic. Now, I made Novak my player of the year, meaning I thought he had the best 2020 out of anybody that year. But Thiem was very, very close. I mean, it was again, he was right there. So 2019, 2020 team, easily number 9 for me. And then at number 10, there's a couple of options here. Options like Tsonga, Berdych, Dimitrov, Zverev, Raonic, Nishikori. And it's very difficult. It's so tough. I don't have a lot of conviction on this one, honestly. Berdych and Tsonga, more offensively minded. Raonic, Nishikori. I mean, who? I guess it's Tsonga. You know, he has the Slam final. He was in the top 10 a ton. You know, to me, a little bit more dynamic than Berdych, just by a little bit. So I think it's Tsonga for me. That number 10 is really, really a crapshoot. All right, let's go on to the next one. Get into some U.S. Open questions, I think, at this point. All right, from Control-Alt-Delete. Some media is comparing his 24... I'm going to replace the word his with Djokovic's. Some media is comparing Djokovic's 24 Grand Slam as equaling Margaret's record, Margaret Court. Man, we're very casual on the identifications here, and not having a record-breaking 24 men's Grand Slam titles, even though there have not been comparisons between men's and women's sports in any other sport. Not even in tennis until Djokovic came along. And even if we somehow do compare apples and oranges, Margaret's record is not eligible, in my opinion, as 11 of her Grand Slams being won before Open era. I don't understand this phenomenon. So, yeah, first of all, from my point of view, I intentionally did not mention Margaret Court on Monday Match Analysis. It's a total nothing burger to me. I literally could not care less about Djokovic equaling Margaret Court. I mean, it just means absolutely nothing to me. And it's not because I don't have respect for Margaret Court's place in tennis history. It's not that at all. It's just I see them as completely different things. So, look, in fairness, there are a couple things. First of all, I think to say we don't compare men and women in every sport, yes, that's true. It is a little bit of an apples and oranges situation when it comes to tennis, because tennis is really the only sport where men and women are literally competing alongside each other at the same events, in the same venues, at the same time. It's just a more integrated sport. So naturally, you are going to have more male-female comparison in tennis than you are NBA versus WNBA, where it's not like it's not like the WNBA finals games are, you get the picture. All right. So that's one thing. Second thing is the phenomenon for Margaret Court to just pop up when it's convenient also happened to Serena Williams. You know, when Serena ultimately got to 23, then people were like, what about Margaret Court? Whereas, I mean, Serena got the Open era record after Serena passed that mark and ended up passing Steffi Graf. They kind of brought Margaret Court into play. The other thing, I was talking to Joel Drucker, who's kind of always such an amazing resource when it comes to, okay, what actually was it like when Margaret Court was playing? And it was a very brief conversation. We didn't get that deep into it, but I can tell you what he told me. First of all, the whole Open era thing was more of a thing for men's tennis, right? Obviously, the men's tour was literally split up into professional and amateur. So you had some of the best players in the world going pro, some of the best players in the world continuing to play amateur tournaments. So you had a period of time in men's tennis where the best players in the world were completely split up, which obviously completely skews everything. The women's tour did not have that. So in defense of Margaret Court, she was competing against, for the most part, the best players in the world. On the other hand, Joel pointed out that it was such a different time in tennis when Margaret Court was playing that the draws at major events were often 32 players. 32! Just to kind of paint a picture of how different it was. Next one. This one is from Stashi. Do you think Dominic Thiem would have had a golden opportunity reaching the semis instead of Shelton if it wasn't for his stomach problems? I know if doesn't exist. All right, well, first let me address Thiem. No. He got a good win over Bublik, but I don't know what that was from Bublik. That was one of the Bublik. That was an example of a Sasha Bublik performance where you shake your head and shrug your shoulders. You don't know what he's doing out there because he just was not dialed in whatsoever. The decision making was horrendous. The forehand was wild. The return of serve was a hack job from Bublik in this match. I don't know what he was doing on return of serve. And yeah, he just went away quietly. So Thiem beat him easily. I did not have expectations that Thiem coming in. Thiem was an underdog in my opinion because he hadn't won on hard court really all year. He hadn't played on hard court since the Sunshine Double coming into the U.S. Open. And I thought Shelton would be a pretty difficult matchup for him with the big lefty serve. That said, Thiem got sick. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to include this comment early in the mailbag was I did want to follow up on a storyline that was very much a factor in the first week of the U.S. Open, which was the illness going around. And unfortunately, it had a real effect on the tournament. Ons Jabeur got sick. Thiem got sick. Emil Ruusuvuori got sick. Chris Eubanks got sick. Hubert Hurkacz got sick. It was going around the locker room, and most players who got it, I mean, some players retired, some players played through it, but most players who got it had a really, really rough go of it. And it's one of those things that, like, coming in the tournament, obviously I was super high on Hurkacz, so when it comes to my predictions, that was the biggest, the biggest miss. That was the most consequential when it comes to my predictions, but and who knows how we would have done, but that's the kind of thing you just can't predict. Some players just got sick as a dog, unfortunately. Next one is from Pietrezzetti. Did you see the Tsitsipas-Stricker match, and if so, did you have any thoughts? I saw end of the fourth set, most of the fifth set. I was watching live for most of the fifth set. And I'd be lying if I told you I have a very detailed, technical analysis of what went down there. But a couple things. First of all, Stricker was a qualifier. So again, kind of going back to what we were looking at with Tsitsipas before the event, I saw big server, big server, big server in Tsitsipas's section. Funny enough, Stricker, who hadn't yet qualified, was not one of those big servers. I think it was going to be like Eubanks and Alice and what in the first round. Who did Tsitsipas beat in the first round? Oh yeah, he beat Raonic. Oh, I was at that match. Oh, Raonic served horribly in that match. Raonic, terrible serving night from Raonic. So that certainly helped Tsitsipas's cause. But Stefanos did look very good in that match. Don't get me wrong, he looked very good. Stricker, so look, a couple things. First of all, I still think that when it comes to Tsitsipas, the reality of his game right now, the reality of his weaknesses on the return, on a quick surface, on an outdoor hard court, you just don't feel good about him early in a major even against a player who brings a highly offensive game and a big serve. And you might feel even worse about that situation if he's playing a lefty. And that's not to say it's bad draw luck for Tsitsipas. It's really not what I'm saying, because if you're a top player and you have kind of stylistic weaknesses, sometimes you're going to have those draws where those things come into play. And I think for Tsitsipas, I wasn't all that shocked just given Stricker's level of talent. First of all, I feel like it's long overdue for Dominic Stricker to make a big splash. I've always liked his weapons. Really, everything about him. I think he volleys well. He serves great. He's got a flat backhand that can sometimes be erratic, but when it's finding the court, it's a pretty damaging backhand, and it's a great aggressive forehand as well. He's got the full offensive package. He is pretty naturally athletic as well. Fitness has been a question mark for me, and against Tsitsipas, he goes 4 hours in hot conditions, 5 sets, 4 hours, and was fine. And then he followed it up with another victory. So I think Stricker was overdue for a result like this. I think Tsitsipas is always vulnerable against this kind of opponent in these conditions. And Stricker played great. And he got the win. So I think those are the extent of my thoughts. But then after the match, you have Tsitsipas in the post-game press conference, so transitioning to kind of what's next for Steph, which is something that I want to talk about because, I mean, I think it's really telling about where Tsitsipas's mind was at after the match. What played out is in the post-match press conference in English, he said, look, it has nothing to do with my coaching. It's all on me. I have to play better. I bear full responsibility. That's what he said. You say, oh, okay, cool. I mean, mature response, way to really kind of shift the narrative away from Mark Philippoussis in your coaching box and just to take the blame. That's kind of what you should do in that situation. Then he gives an interview in Greek to Eurosport, and he says Mark isn't going to coach me anymore. So he essentially fired Mark Philippoussis on the day he lost the U.S. Open, which indirectly is doing the opposite of what he said in the press conference. It is blaming. That's the optics of that. And that is true in everything, right? Like if you are and I'm just going to pick a random job. If you're a truck driver and you crash the truck and get fired in the morning and you get fired that afternoon, it's pretty clear what the implication of that is. It's someone has determined that it's your fault. If Tsitsipas parted ways with Philippoussis this week, let's say he announced it this week, then that would be a different story. That would be a very professional way to handle it and just be like, you know what, I'm not feeling it. But to do it the day that you lost, to fire your coach, not the best way to handle it, in my opinion. It is not the most professional way to handle it. You wait a little bit, you let it die down. To me, you are kind of slapping Mark in the face by firing him the day of your match, in my opinion. But the fact that it's going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth between Philippoussis, Pops, Philippoussis, Father, Philippoussis, it just goes to show you that the stuff happening, off the court is more than likely playing a role and stunting Tsitsipas's development. Because at the end of the day, you got to figure out what your team is going to look like and who you want to be coached by and how you want to be coached. And then you need to develop some buy-in and some consistency, and you need to work towards some long-term goals. That hasn't happened with Steph. From Dion. What do you think about Coco and Casper's comments about Twitter experts? Are their/your observations limited? Can these comments permanently affect a player? Yeah, good question. I'd say this is in my wheelhouse. So Casper said basically that 5%, I don't know if he was talking about Twitter, but he basically said, he reads a lot of what tennis journalists say, and 5% of them know what they're talking about, and the other 95%, you shouldn't listen to them at all. He basically said, it was a message to fans, basically, that people don't know what they're talking about, right? Then Coco, after she won the U.S. Open, was basically like, this is dedicated to my doubters. This is to my haters, They said I wasn't going to win a 500. I won a 500. They said I wasn't going to win a 1,000. I won a 1,000. They said I wasn't going to win a slam. I won a slam. Yeah, so both of those, these are young players, and they are online. They see what's being said on Twitter. They see what's being said on Instagram. I do wanted to talk about this, though, because some people first of all, there were different responses about what Coco said, certainly. And some people were like, talk that talk, Coco. You go, girl. And then others were like, why are you Why are you giving oxygen right now to the haters? Like, you just won the US Open. Don't you have better things to worry about, bigger things to worry about? And then also, like, don't you see all of the people supporting you? Don't you see all of the positive stuff that's been written about you in the last 5 weeks? Don't you realize that, like, for the most part, the whole machine, the media machine, is totally behind you and completely rooting for you? So, like, why are you focusing on the negative stuff? And when you say, like, media, like, are you really talking about media, or are you just, like, reading random people on Instagram and Twitter? Like, nobody's, right? And I think players do get confused when it comes to those two kinds of things. Here's what I can relate to, though, when it comes to Coco and Casper and, like, focusing on the negativity. This is a universal thing. And I don't get... I get a minuscule fraction of the feedback on the internet that Coco and Casper did. Like, a tiny, minuscule fraction of it. But I think anybody who gets any feedback on the internet about what they do and their work can relate to this. There's a horrible disease, I'm going to call it internet brain, where you read 10 positive things, 1 negative thing, and all you can dwell on, all the what takes up your brain space and your head space is the negative thing. I know I've experienced that. I've worked on it. I've gotten better with it, but I know I've experienced that. And when Coco, you know, when the first thing Coco wants to talk about after winning the US Open is the haters, I got to think it's a similar thing with her, because there are a lot of people building her up, covering her well, you know, promoting her with positivity and balance and fairness. But if all she can focus on, or if the main thing she's focusing on is the haters, it's just probably an example of, as I would say, internet brain. We're all victims of it. And by the way, if she takes that negativity and uses it in a way that is positive, that fuels her, that doesn't negatively affect her mental health, cool, great, do it. No problems there. But man, it's concerning what young tennis players go through. Very, very, very concerning. Right? Like how awful, like what they're subjected to all the time is awful. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. I know Iga a couple weeks ago was like, I'd like to make an announcement, stop saying abusive and terrible things on the internet. And she actually asked journalists to help encourage that. Whew, if journalists had the power to stop people from being nasty on the internet, let me tell you something. Journalists would be first in line. They'd be the first signing up for that alternate reality. Unfortunately, there is nothing that can be done. There is nothing Iga can say. There is nothing a journalist can say. People are going to be horrible on the internet. And players have to be subjected to it. They can completely shut off, you know, turn off. Lower ranked players can't do that because, and I was talking about this with I won't say publicly, but I was talking about this with somebody, and they were talking about how the players' endorsements are so much based on how many social media followers they have. So they have to engage in their social medias, and oftentimes they can't afford anyone to pay anyone to do it for them. It's a terrible position. And I know I'm on a tangent here. I'm completely off in left field, but it's really interesting what's happening here with the age of social media and players coming up and getting constant feedback and a lot of abuse on a day-by-day basis, and how they handle that and how they internalize that is so important. Anyway, hopefully I'm in the 5%, and I'll leave it at that. Oh, I guess there's one other thing. Truth-telling is an aspect where both current players and former players can struggle, and they can hesitate, and they can shy away from certain things. Never discount the advantage that an outsider has And that advantage is that they are not conflicted. They don't have conflicts of interest. Casper Ruud can try to, like, Casper Ruud is looking at it from a Casper Ruud lens. Okay? Casper Ruud, when he gets critiqued, when he gets criticized, of course he ain't going to agree with a lot of it. That's not the point of criticism and critique. It's just not. You're not supposed to agree with it. You think when musicians read critique, musical artists, you think they agree? Or you think they say, you don't know what you're talking about? You think when chefs at restaurants read the reviews of their restaurants, you think they agree? Or you think they say, that writer doesn't know what they're talking about? This is a natural reaction to getting critiqued. This is what people do in response to criticism. It doesn't mean the criticism is wrong. It doesn't mean they don't know what they're talking about. But this is just how, this is the relationship that occurs. They get to say what they want. They get to speak their piece. Outside, like, media gets to say their piece. And there shouldn't always be an agreement there. There shouldn't. There can't be. It's never how it's going to work. And tennis players, it's a little bit personal. They can be a little bit sensitive. Like, does the manager of Chelsea agree when the journalist writes that they played the wrong tactic? No. Is that journalist therefore an idiot? No. Next one from Racket Talk. If you could describe it, what are Djokovic's weaknesses? What are some things that make him uncomfortable on the court? It seems like Djokovic has become a master of preparation. Not only does he understand what his opponent's weaknesses are, but he knows exactly how to exploit them, to the extent where after a loss, Novak in a big match, the whole world will only be talking about how glaring all those holes and weaknesses are in the opponent. Racket Talk is a member. Thank you for that. I try to give priority to members in the mailbag. I know I have a lot of comments from members coming up. It is the join button on YouTube, and it is a contribution of $2 a month to support the channel. You are under no obligation, but it is appreciated. All right. Hardest question you could ask. What are Djokovic's weaknesses? Okay. This time has come. You're going to give me, like, the most difficult mailbag question in the world. I am up to the task. I do have an answer. Okay. First of all, he's the most complete player and the most technically sound player of all time, in all likelihood. But yeah, there are weaknesses. All right, let's do it. First of all, when it comes to his backhand, the performance, its ability to perform, goes down quite dramatically when you are able to disrupt his contact points. Meaning, you get the backhand above the shoulders or you get it below the knees, and suddenly Djokovic's backhand is the effect of it is reduced in a pretty big way. Now, that is in a way true for all players, but I will say there are players like, I don't know, Alexander Zverev, where it's kind of, part of it is him being 6'6", part of it is him being really good on the high backhand. You really can't attack him from getting the ball up high on his backhand. Even, you know, as good as his two-hander is, it's not really something that he's susceptible to. You look at a guy like Stan Wawrinka. You can get it as low as you'd want. It's not going to bother him whatsoever. He's still going to rip topspin backhands. But I think with Novak, if you can disrupt the contact point on his backhand, he can, he'll make more errors. He'll give you more short balls. He'll give you slower shots, more attackable balls, all of that. Obviously, the overhead is not reliable. The kick serve is not that heavy. So, you know, Novak's second serve is very precise, pretty consistent. It usually doesn't let him down. He can hit it hard when he needs to, usually with a good amount of reliability, but it's not a very heavy kick serve. So I'd say that's another weakness. The last weakness that I will highlight is when he gets tight, sometimes he will not hit out on the forehand. He will not be able to do damage from the back with his forehand when he is tight. When nerves aren't really in the equation and he's feeling at his best, he can hit his forehand plenty big. But there are those tight moments where Djokovic will get into a mode where he just can't seem to really hit two aggressive targets with pace on a consistent basis. So there you have it. Novak Djokovic's weaknesses. From Sarah. Hi, Gill. If you were given the opportunity to interview each of the big three, what question would you ask each of them? Feel free to add in or swap them out for any other players if you have a question in mind. So I have actually avoided this question in the mailbag for, I think, a while now, because I do see it a lot. The reality is there's not, like, the best interviews, it's not about asking a great question. The first question is never going to give you the great interview. The great interview is always follow-ups. It's always digging deeper it's going deeper with the player after their initial response. That's always, and creating that kind of conversational atmosphere. That's what makes a great interview. So I'm going to give you topics. I would love to talk to Federer about how the game changed. I see Roger kind of as a bridge between early 90s, early 2000s, and what became kind of the norm in the 2010s, which was the highly consistent, physical, heavy topspin, high margin aggression baseline game. A lot of racket speed, a lot of spin, a lot of big hitting from the back, a lot of deeper court positions, right? What we know the game as now, and now it's even changing again, right? Because the game's going to continue to evolve. But I see Federer as such an interesting stylistic bridge of that kind of throwback era and the modern era. And that's what I'd love to have a deep conversation with Roger about that, and also how it relates to his game. Because, he had to keep some things from, growing up and all the net rushing and the serve and volley skills that he learned as he was developing and all that, but he also had to adapt. So that's what I would like to talk to Federer about. What about this for Rafa? I would love to get into a discussion with him and Novak about what it's like when they rally on the ad side. How Rafa feels when he takes his cross-court forehand into Novak's backhand, and how Novak feels when he's hitting his backhand cross-court into Rafa's forehand. It's just that would be an example of a deeply technical conversation that would be really interesting to have with both of them. Talking about kind of the process of coming back from injury would be an interesting thing with Nadal. For Novak, I'd love to kind of dig into what he feels in big moments in tennis matches, how he processes high pressure situations in tennis matches. Just talk about clutchness, the idea of tennis, clutchness in tennis. I'd love to talk to Novak about that. But in general, like, you got to understand, if I had an interview with these guys, I mean, now I guess it's different with Federer and Nadal because they don't have any recent tennis to speak of, but I would ask about like recent stuff that's happened. I would try to do a timely interview. So this question has always been daunting to me, this mailbag question. I've never really felt like I could do it any justice with my response, but I decided to give it a shot this time. So that's that. All right, next one is from Trevitt. Hey, Gill, do you think Medvedev overcoming the Alcaraz hurdle this week will change the dynamic, particularly with how seedings will most likely look going into Australia? Carlitos is going to have to get past him before he can ever come up against Novak at a major, providing Novak keeps his top spot. I have a feeling Medvedev is going to play a big factor on how the Carlitos-Novak rivalry will play out when we are looking back at this in 2 years to come. Great work. Love the content. Appreciate you. Okay, I mean, the stuff about the seedings is a little bit convoluted. you don't know how it's going to play out. I mean, Alcaraz might be the 1 seed come the Australian Open. Novak might be the 1 seed. Medvedev could be on either half of the bracket. Remember that. It's not. So forget the seeding aspect of that question. But it is a very prudent topic, obviously, is to talk about, like, what does Medvedev Alcaraz look like going forward? So let's be even-handed and let's look at the Alcaraz-Medvedev head-to-head right now. It's 2-2. Their first meeting at Wimbledon is a throwaway a couple years ago. Alcaraz has crushed him with a capital C twice, and Medvedev beat him at the U.S. Open once in a match that was much, much closer than the previous 2 meetings. That is to say that, I mean, Medvedev won 2 sets in that match. In 2 out of the 3 sets, Alcaraz generated more break opportunities than Medvedev. Alcaraz winning twice by a ton, by a country mile, Medvedev winning a close match once, does not mean that going forward it's going to be an even head-to-head. That's the crux of what I want to say here. I am not here to tell you that it's not going to be an even head-to-head. I am here to tell you that it would not surprise me if a year from now we still think that Alcaraz is a bad matchup for Medvedev. Or not that we still think it, that we think it again, that we rethink it. Like, I'm not convinced that Alcaraz is not a bad matchup for Medvedev just because Medvedev beat him in 1 match. We got to see more than that. Especially because a lot of Alcaraz's tactics worked once again. And again, it's like, certainly what happened in the match is no fluke. Certainly what happened in the match can happen again, where Medvedev outserved Alcaraz and Medvedev out-solided Alcaraz from the back. Yeah, certainly those things can happen again. But I do think it's kind of the second part is a little bit in Alcaraz's hands. I know he has the ability to match Medvedev for consistency on a great day. And if he kind of comes in with the right tactics and the right mindset and the right execution, I know he can do it. He certainly didn't do it in New York, but I know he can do it. We've seen him do it before. In terms of the serve, maybe not so much. But then it's, would we see a repeat of that? So, all right, I regret going so long on this. Net. Don't react too harshly to Medvedev winning a close match over Alcaraz. It does not mean that we have an even head-to-head on our hands. It very well could be an outlier. All right? Rublev beat Medvedev twice in a row. Is that a bad matchup for Rublev? Heck yeah, it's a bad matchup for Rublev. Like, this stuff happens. They are too close together in level, really, for it to have been like a situation where Medvedev just never wins. And I know a lot of people, I was asked a mailbag question. There's a YouTube short out there where it almost looks like I'm saying that Medvedev is never going to win. I never believed that Medvedev was never going to beat Alcaraz in his career. But I did say, I think it's a horrible matchup, and I don't think it's about surfaces, right? I still pretty much think that. I still think that if they play 10 times, I don't think it's going to be 5-5. I don't. I think Alcaraz will have the upper hand in that head-to-head. Still, I'm not going to completely reverse that off of one close match, especially in the 4th set where, you got to look at clutchness. Completely lopsided. I mean, Alcaraz had 6 break points in 2 separate games and 6 game points in the game that he was broken. And that's when he started to play tactically an aware match, because the first set and the second set, not even close, as we talked about with Steve. All right, next one is from Riton Karoy. Hi, Gill. Great to have the mailbags back. 2 questions. 1, You mentioned Medvedev needs to work on his approach versus serve and volley. What does he need to do? He struggled a lot standing up versus Alcaraz at Wimbledon. Should he test the same tactic on clay first to work on it? Maybe play the Masu swing or the Ruud swing? No, he definitely shouldn't do that. 2, speaking of Ruud, okay, well, let me answer the first one first. No, I mean, clay is a surface where it makes little sense to, I mean, that's where it's easiest to, that's where you get the most benefit out of standing deep, generally, on clay. So I don't think he should stand up on clay. No. I think he should try a middle ground, I think. You know, why against Alcaraz at Wimbledon, when he started to stand up, he was what, 4 or 5 feet behind the baseline versus 17 feet behind the baseline. I know I talked about this with Steve. Let's like try 10 feet or try 8 feet back. Try a little bit of a tweener so that you can cut off the angle on the slice out wide, give the serve and volleyer less time to close the net, and give the serve and volleyer less court to hit the first volley into. That's what he's got to do. And I don't think it's about trying it out on clay or trying it out on a certain surface. It's really about doing it in practice and doing it in matches. The one thing where I think you're onto something with your suggestion about the Masu swing or the Ruud swing, I do think, yes, absolutely, if Medvedev can do it when the stakes are a little bit lower, that would definitely be ideal. You don't want to like whip it out, start doing it in slam semifinals for the first time. Okay, that is not the play. You got to do it when the pressure is at a lower level. And maybe you got to do it against players who are not Djokovic and Alcaraz, because it might be true that you can beat other players without that, you know, without adjusting your return position whatsoever, but you do need to get those repetitions in, and you got to get comfortable in it. So you got to do it on the practice court, but you got to do it in matches. And it is true that it's best to not wait until major semifinals to try it out. All right, second question here. Speaking of Ruud, you said that Ruud may win a slam, but Rublev won't. Ruud is currently 0-13 versus Novak, Rafa, Medvedev, and Alcaraz, slam winners of the last 5 years. How do you see him winning a slam? In my opinion, he had a good draw at RG22 and has been overseeded ever since. Well, yeah, certainly. That's not a hot take. Now that he is outside the top 8, he'll struggle big time as he'll draw top players before the quarterfinals. Yeah, look, this is very simple. I never said that Ruud was good enough to win a slam at any point. I said that he should be at some point. All right? The Rublev versus Ruud comparison is completely a comparison of trajectory. It's all trajectory, that entire assessment. It's the fact that Ruud has been going up and up and up and up and up and up and up until this year. If Ruud doesn't get better for the next 3 years, now we can start to assess him in the same way that we assess Rublev, who has made some incremental improvements in 2023, no doubt about it, but has not gotten a lot better since 2020. So, you know, it's kind of 3 years, same kind of thing, same kind of thing, same kind of thing. That's the difference. Where Ruud, as I mentioned, I think, in the mailbag that you're referring to, has cut his ranking in half 4 consecutive years. Now, that's going to end this year, again. So I think, you know, look, what's happened with Ruud here is somewhat concerning in the short term at the very least. But I think, you know, you got to give him maybe a year to kind of figure this out and try to turn this around until it'll be time to kind of reassess. And also, do keep in mind, my declaration there was not that Ruud will win a slam, because I actually specifically said that he might never win a slam, despite being a 3-time finalist already. I specifically declared that he may never win a slam. All I was saying at that time was he can. And, I mean, frankly, whenever somebody makes 3 finals at the age that Ruud is, it would be disappointing if it's all said and done and he never wins one. Disappointing for him, disappointing for his fans. That's all. Next one from Zach. You've touched around it in other videos, but I'm curious where you would rank Medvedev's backhand compared to other backhands on the tour. Personally, due to how consistent it's been, I'd have it at 2, behind Zverev's and ahead of Novak's right now, not Novak's at his physical best. I'd have it at 1. Yeah, it's my favorite backhand on the tour. Zverev's is bigger, but Zverev's is more erratic. Not that it's an erratic backhand. I mean, Sasha's backhand is very consistent, but it's not Medvedev consistent. The reason Medvedev is my favorite backhand on tour is because my philosophy or my preference about what the ideal modern backhand is a shot that is always unattackable and always protected at the highest level. Now, if Medvedev had a great forehand, that would bring him as a player to the next level. And that's why at times when his forehand has been really good this year, that's why it's propelled him back to the upper echelons of the sport, even with players game planning against him much better than they did in 2020 and 2021. Essentially, Medvedev has the least attackable backhand in the world. The defense is top tier. The trading is better than anybody's. The depth, how low it stays. Again, the consistency. Nobody's really better in that department. Not to mention, there is enough there where it's not as if he can't create damage off of his backhand, especially on low bouncing surfaces or quicker surfaces. When he takes that thing down the line, when he has open court to redirect into, he's absolutely lethal. You look at the Alcaraz match, there was no better ground stroke on the court than Medvedev's backhand down the line. Alcaraz was a step slow trying to cover that backhand down the line the entire match, and it was a punishing shot for Medvedev that was precise and consistent and damaging and reliable and all of the things you want. So it's just dynamite. It's a total shield, the Medvedev backhand. Dynamite. My favorite on tour. In my opinion, the most effective on tour. Hey, Gill, what do you think of Toni Nadal's comments regarding the current state of the top 10 compared to in the past? All right, here's what Toni Nadal said. He said, I pulled it up here. Years ago, top players were better than now. They were more competitive. Nadal would definitely beat Medvedev. Murray beat Zverev. Wawrinka beat Ruud. Del Potro beat Rublev. And Ferrer beat Rune. All right. A couple things. One, Toni obviously sees things through a Rafa lens. Being his uncle, being his coach, he'd be the first to admit he sees everything through a Rafa lens. And what everybody does in every sport is they think that their era was the strongest and the toughest and the best and the most entertaining and all of that blah, 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 blah. Everybody says this all the time. It's never true. It's everybody is biased towards their own personal era. But then the second part of his comment, I mean, if this is how he's looking at it, then yeah, Nadal would definitely beat Medvedev. Nadal, better player than Medvedev. Murray over Zverev? Yeah, Murray's better than Zverev. Wawrinka over Ruud? Yeah, Stan is better than Ruud. Del Potro over Rublev? Same thing. Del Potro's a more dynamic player than Rublev. Ferrer over Rune. I mean, that's just a weird one. I mean, Rune's literally 20 years old. I don't think he's making good comparisons of. I don't think he's making good comparisons, honestly. Meaning, he's taking players who were one tier above in the 2010s or in a decade ago, let's just say. And so in 2013, he's taking players who were the best players in 2013 and matching them up against players who are one tier below them now. And yeah, of course, obviously, in the comparisons he made, yeah, if that's how he's looking at it, then yeah. But when you include Nadal and Murray, and you ignore Alcaraz, who is right. Like if you don't talk about Alcaraz and you don't talk about Sinner, and instead you talk about Rune and Rublev, it's like, yeah, that's why your comparisons, that's why you were able to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 examples of players in 2013 who were going to beat players of today, because you're not making an apples to orange. So yeah, I don't know. Bizarre comment. I don't really get what he's getting at. From Roman. Hey Gil, love your comment. Thank you. And thank you for being a member. I was wondering if your opinion on the Alcaraz forehand has remained unchanged compared to your post-Wimbledon analysis. While I do feel like in offensive positions it might be the best forehand in the world, long rallies and positions behind the baseline against Medvedev and having to play it on the run have left it a bit exposed in my mind. What do you think? Good question. Because Wimbledon was also the time when I, for the first time, kind of relented that it might be the best forehand in the world, where previously, if you asked me in 2022 or all of 2023, I would have told you no. I would have told you Alcaraz is not my top forehand, that it's too erratic, that he doesn't defend on it well enough, that it's rushed too easily, that it doesn't absorb pace well enough. And then it was kind of like, okay, I didn't see any erraticism really on clay. And then at Wimbledon, man, he defended it well. He returned on it well. He absorbed pace on it well. And that's why after Wimbledon, I'm like, well, it's the biggest in the world. It's checking all those boxes that I previously didn't check, and I put it at number 1. So that was my thought process. But it did not have a very long reign at number 1. And I think right now, yeah, I would be rethinking that once again. Because, look, I try not to make quick and rash decisions, but if you have the context of me putting Alcaraz forehand number 1 really like for the first time, then obviously it's going to be easier for me to kind of take that away from him in my mind, because I had just put him there. It was very, very fresh. So yeah, I definitely have my doubts once again about if, putting that forehand up against Djokovic and Tsitsipas and Rublev, who, by the way, I think I underranked in my top 10. Yeah, I definitely have my questions about, okay, like, do I really have Alcaraz as number 1? Yeah, maybe not. Maybe not. It's tough, though. He's definitely still in the conversation. Next one from Josh. Hi, Gil. I ran into you in the Lower East Side right before the tournament started. Good to meet you out in the wild. Yeah, I remember you, Josh. It was good to meet you. It was kind of wild because I do get recognized quite a bit when I'm at tennis tournaments, or even when I'm like at tennis courts, in tennis areas, I can get recognized. I have never been recognized like just walking down the street in a random area. I was literally like with my friends after we had dinner in New York. So yeah, that was funny. Okay, anyway, you mentioned how Novak has evolved and changed his game to adapt. Better serve, volley, shortening points. This has helped him win 12 titles after turning 30. Nadal has 8 and Federer has 4, not matching what Novak has been able to do at this later age. Were there skills or tactics that Federer maybe should have looked to build later in his career, or did he just hit a wall with Novak and Rafa? Yeah, I would give all 3 major props for the adaptations that they made. I don't think that any of the 3 missed the boat on evolving their games. I think that maybe you could say for Federer, it came a little bit too late in his career. Like maybe it could have been a couple years earlier, maybe as many as 4 years earlier. The adaptations could have come. Maybe in 2014 and 2015, he could have been doing the things that we ended up seeing in 2017. But ultimately, he did get there, and then the body said no more. For Rafa, he has done an exceptional job of evolving, but he's had more issues with the body. What separates Novak, the reason I think, the stat you point out, and you have Novak at 12 and Nadal at 8 and Federer at 4, it has to do with the adaptations being there, just like they were for Federer and Nadal, but the body not declining as much as they did for those two. I think that's how I would look at it. From Squire. Hi, Gill. Do you ever think about the dimensions of a tennis court? How arbitrarily were they decided? I think it could be a fun thought experiment to imagine how different the sport's history would be if the court happened to be 2 or 3 inches smaller or larger. I want whatever drugs you're on. I'd like those as well. No, I'm just joking. But it does sound like a conversation that would be a lot of fun on mushrooms. But anyway, I've never taken mushrooms. I just, from what I hear, that seems like something that would be a good conversation to have on mushrooms. Yeah, I did put some thought into it, and you got to think that if the court were a little bit wider, you would see less net play. I think you'd see less net play. It's just, there'd be too much space to pass. You would need that time to kind of cover. And obviously, I think it would be more baseline oriented. I think if you shrunk the court more, you would have to come forward. It would be really hard to finish from the back. You would have to come forward. And there would actually be a lot of points where it would be kind of like reflex volley points like we see in doubles, like net player. It wouldn't be as much passing shots. It would be more like one player is at net, the other player is back, and you'd see kind of longer rallies with one player up and one player back. I think there would be a lot of points like that. I think you would want to serve and volley. If the court was like much shorter, you'd want to get up there. I think it'd be a lot like pickleball, right? In pickleball, I can't believe I'm making a pickleball analogy. In pickleball, you want to get forward up to net as soon as you can. Like if you stay back in pickleball, you're an idiot. And I think that's what tennis would be like if you really shrunk the court. Next one is from Vinker Slavsalovic. Okay. Great content, Gill. I think that people don't compliment Novak enough on his anticipation skills. I see that he is usually right when choosing the location to receive smashes and passing shots, or even playing side-to-side rallies, much more so than other players, especially on critical points. Medvedev himself said that he had 2 choices on the point to win the second set in the U.S. Open final and just chose the wrong one. You covered that point in your analysis of the final and made the point that Novak just guessed right. Would you agree that Novak is also exceptional in guessing? If so, how do you think he manages to anticipate better than the rest of the players, and why isn't it mentioned a lot? Or am I just plain wrong in my observation? No, you're right. His anticipation is fantastic. And, part of it I don't think can be taught. I literally don't think a tennis coach could possibly teach someone, to anticipate well on the court. But, some players do it much better than others. Part of it is doing your homework. And it's very hard, I think, with the tendencies to, in the heat of battle, to, keep your homework in mind. But some of it is scouting. Some of it is just reading the game as it goes. And I think it's a combination between those things. And not only reading your opponent, but kind of reading your own ball and your own positioning. And yeah, those split-second decisions where you just need to be sharp mentally. And I think for the best players, the game, it happens really, really slow for them. So they just make the right decisions about, where to go. And they also have some court awareness, right? So sometimes anticipation is not as much a guessing game. Sometimes it's understanding, okay, I just hit a drop shot down the line, and you're reading the player's grip. And let's say they have a drive grip, and okay, if they're going to drive the ball, they probably want the lower part of the net, and they're going to hit that, they're going to go cross court, right? They're probably, with a drive grip where they're trying to hit the ball hard, they're probably not going to go down the line. But if they have a slice grip, okay, now they might redrop. Now I'm going to go cover the redrop. So making those reads, those really subtle reads, are really important. Yeah, Novak excels at that. Next one from Jack. Hi, Gill. 2 takes I heard on U.S. Open broadcast that I want to hear your take on. 1, today's Novak is better than 26-year-old Novak. This is because the game is always improving, so to still be the best, he has to constantly be getting better. All right, I'll answer that first. Tough one. It's so tough. I've been talking about this a while, right? I've been trying to answer this question a while. I just think 26-year-old Novak might be a little too physical for today's Novak. Number 2, players are competing better than they used to. This is due to more players having sports psychologists on their team. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good theory. I think players are the larger trend on tour is that players have dedicated physiotherapists. So I think the improvement that's been made by players physically is more drastic than the improvement that's been made by most players psychologically. But nonetheless, I think that that's a pretty good take. All right, next one is from Niklas, also a member. Casper Ruud has, by most accounts, had a disappointing 2023 season so far. Could one go as far as to say that the success he achieved in 2022 might have been hurtful to his development? At least to me, despite his many deep runs, it never felt that the ranking reflected his true level as a tennis player, with roads to the finals often being aided by opened-up draws and him hardly ever being able to defeat a top player, especially one in form. Being in the limelight, furthermore, adds to expectations and makes you a bigger target for mockery on social media. He's never won more than a 250, etc. How do you see these things, and what advice would you give to Casper moving forward? I think you make some good points in here. Now, I think the key is that next time he gets to those kinds of positions, right? Next time he's in a major final. Next time he's in the top 5. Assuming he, it's not a guarantee. Nothing's guaranteed. But let's say he gets back to those places. I think the experience of 2022 will ultimately help him. And therefore, I will never say it's going to be long-term negative for his career that he accomplished those things. Now, was he ready to maintain it in 2023? No. That much is very clear. But I think in the long run, those experiences will ultimately help him. Now, I understand the downsides in the short term of having those expectations and having that kind of that spotlight bestowed onto you. I get that, but I think in the long run, it's still ultimately a good thing. And losing is not always a bad thing in the long run either. Hopefully he learns from what's happening this year and can make some adjustments on that. All right. Hey, Gill, curious about your thoughts on Zverev this tournament. His match against Sinner was probably my favorite of the tournament, and I really feel like Zverev has improved his net/volleying skills since the comeback, and we saw some great early point offensive tennis on the forehand too. I believe these were the deciding factors in him winning his match, as he had more ways of winning points than Sinner. The quality in the Dimitrov match was also incredible in the first 2 sets. 2 deep slam runs and a couple of top 10 wins in the last few months. He is also back in the top 10 and 8th in the race to Turin. I think he is set up well to head back into the top 5 of the rankings and be a slam contender again in 2024. Look, I agree with those sentiments. Zverev, and I got a lot of comments about his match against Sinner, a lot of people wanting me to talk about that match, which I was at from start to finish. I like the way he's playing. I really like the style of tennis, the brand of tennis that he has committed himself to. I think it's really good stuff from Sasha. He is coming forward a ton. Now, at times, it's been interesting to monitor and watch his success rate coming to net. That part has not always been positive. You can look at the first 2 sets against Dimitrov. You can look at the first 4 sets against Sinner. You can look at the match against Alcaraz. And he has fairly negative win rates coming forward, which is atypical. Most players who come forward are winning the majority of the points, considering they are usually coming in from offensive positions. I don't think his volleys are far above average. If you want to make an argument that they're slightly above average, I'll hear it. If you want to make an argument that they are just average, I'll also hear it. And that's where I tend to lean. But he is a competent volleyer. He is good enough. He's a good enough volleyer where I think he is a better player coming forward when he has the opportunities. Now, in the 5th set against Sinner, I could not agree more. He came out with great volleys in the 5th set, and that was the main difference. He was more creative. He had better ways to win the points against Jannik. I will say about that match, you can't put too much stock into it. Now, look, I picked Zverev. I thought Zverev would win, and Zverev won. That said, I could never have imagined the circumstances that match was played under. And at the end of the day, it became a complete war of attrition. It was not so much about the tennis as much as maybe it should have been or could have been. Both players were suffering for a long, long time in that match. Sinner started cramping in the second set. Zverev was incredibly fatigued throughout the match. For the duration, it really came to a head in the fourth set. I mean, neither player was at more than 70%. So it was thrilling to watch. And I so admire both players for their pain tolerance and their effort and their fight, their will to win was just a remarkable display. The fans got an incredible match under the worst of circumstances. And both of them, I was just wanting to give them a golf clap the entire match for the show that they were putting on. But was it really a match that was the best representation of their tennis skills? Not really. It was more a showcase of their attritional skills and their mental strength more than anything. Kind of knew that it was going to put Zverev in a terrible position trying to beat Alcaraz in 2 days. I just didn't think that he was going to be able to recover physically from that, and he wasn't. He was banged up. So the same thing happened at Roland Garros. He had an injury and wasn't able to compete very well in the semis. That said, I do not think Alcaraz is a good matchup for Zverev. I think Alcaraz, the way he takes the forecourt, and he just disrupts Zverev's defense really, really well with the drop shot and with the net play. So, yeah, I think a healthy and fresh Zverev beats Alcaraz? No, I don't. But a very positive tournament for Zverev. Things are really moving in the right direction. And I'm just fascinated to continue to track his increased net rushing, because I think it's a good move, but I also think it's not a foolproof and bulletproof move. Whereas, sometimes the fact that he's not a great volleyer means that it can come back to bite him. All right, I will do two more questions. From Sam Collins. Hey, Gill, how much of a factor do you think home court advantage is? Would love to hear your thoughts about home court advantage in tennis versus other sports. Thanks. It's much more complicated in tennis than it is in other sports, and it's much less of a clear-cut advantage in tennis than it is in other sports. Some really good research has been executed, first of all, about how in other sports, the main area where the officials are prone, or not the officials, the main area where home advantage is materialized is in the officiating. And obviously in tennis, that aspect is completely taken out. There's really not officiating in tennis. There are no judgment calls. Therefore, an umpire cannot be biased for the home player, really. So that's one thing. Second thing is that different players, I just think, handle it in different ways. Some players excel with crowd support and that extra pressure and that extra distraction. And, some players use it in a good way. Some players don't. I think some players just start to feel more pressure and they play worse, right? Tiafoe at the City Open, Washington, D.C. I would say, if you ask Tiafoe, like, what tournaments do you want to win in your career? He'd probably say, I'm just guessing, he'd probably say the Four Slams and then DC. And Francis hasn't been able to make it happen. He lost to Dan Evans this year. Because pressure is not a good thing for tennis players. We know that. Pressure is almost always a bad thing. So it's very complicated, and I think it really depends on the player in a big way. All right, Gil, do you think that Medvedev could get some pointers from Nadal on countering serve and volley while using a deep return position? No, I don't think he can get pointers from Nadal. There's just a lot of major differences. I mean, one, Nadal was he would dip it at your feet time and time again. You wouldn't get high volleys when you were playing against Nadal because his heavy topspin made it really easy for him to give you a low first volley that you would have to hit up on the volley. At the end of the day, that's the biggest key against when you're serving volleying. The biggest thing that's going to be determining your level of success is whether or not you have to hit up on the first volley. If you have to hit up on the first volley, it's going to be hard to put it away. If you don't, it's going to be very easy to put it away. So Nadal is on the opposite spectrum in topspin of Medvedev, and that's a huge deal. It makes it so that Medvedev has trouble getting the return low, and Nadal does not. So for all the talk about return position, make no mistake, the spin rate is another big part of why Medvedev struggles with that tactic. It is not the court position in isolation, but you are correct to bring up Nadal, and you make an interesting point to bring up Nadal, and I thank you for doing that so I could highlight that difference. Oh, you know what? I did forget one. It's an Apple Podcast question, and that's why I forgot to include it. So let's end on this. Question for the post-US Open 23 mailbag. Okay, any thoughts on the Sinner Zverev match? I did already answer that. But the last one. A general question. What's the more important shot, the serve or the return of serve? I've heard people say that the serve is the most important shot in tennis. However, it feels like most of the elite/legendary players are elite returners. Thank you for reading my questions. Yeah, good observation. You're bang on. It's pretty hard to make an argument that the serve is the most important shot in tennis, which is something that I've also heard, but I don't know where it comes from. Like, nobody of note has ever said this, right? It feels like something that's just been perpetuated by like club level coaches for absolutely no reason. Or maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe Rod Laver said this and I missed it, but I feel like nobody of note actually said this. But yeah, like when the best servers in the history of tennis are realistically like John Isner, Ivo Karlovic. Let's look at Ultimate Tennis Statistics aces. Let's look at the all-time ace leaders, okay? Let's just read them. Let's see how many all-time greats are in there. I know for a fact even Pete Sampras isn't in there because he, I think the way he served was not really geared towards getting aces, but setting up his first volley to the best of his ability. And we're going to do ace percentage, of course. You know that total aces is misleading. We want to do ace percentage. Okay, here we go. Number 1, Ivo Karlovic. Number 2, Riley Opelka. Number 3, John Isner. Number 4, Milos Raonic. Number 5, Sam Groth. Number 6, Wayne Arthurs. Number 7, Joachim Johansson. Number 8, Nick Kyrgios. Number 9, Maxime Cressy. Number 10, first guy I've never heard of, Chris Guccione. Guccione. How good was he? How good was he? Oh, career high, 67 in the world in 2008. Okay. Well, if you got to a career high 67 past the year like 2010, I would have heard of you. If that makes Chris Guccione feel any better, or Guccione, I don't know. All right. Well, yeah, like that list should tell you something. Whereas, unfortunately, the only thing is when it comes to the return, we don't have a great metric to isolate the return. We'd have to do return in play percentage. In play points, 1%. I'm trying to see if they have that. I don't think they have that here. Return games 1, return rating, second serve. Yeah. It's tough because we don't have return in play percentage, which would isolate the return. I would be fascinated to see that stat. Now, I know that probably the calculation of that stat has not always been around. The more important shot, in my opinion, is the return of serve. It is the return of serve that has separated the great players in the sport. For the most part, much more than the serve has. And it's also kind of just signaled, if you have a great return of serve, you probably are very well coordinated off the ground. You are highly athletic. You read the game well. You're able to absorb pace. You're able to control your technique. You have great balance. Like all of these things kind of go hand in hand with having a great return of serve. Whereas the serve, some players have a good serve and it doesn't really demonstrate that wide array of attributes. So yeah, I mean, I much prefer a player who has an elite return, and I'm more confident that player is going to do big things in the sport versus a player who has an elite serve. All right, as promised, went super, super long here to make up for lost time. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.